Hello and welcome to this deep dive. We're here to take a really close look at what matters, giving you the essential understanding without, getting lost in the detail. Thanks for watching Westferry Times. Today we're looking at something pretty critical in the UK's energy world. The big changes to the contracts for difference scheme, the CfD scheme. These reforms could really reshape things for renewables. And to help us unpack all this, we've got Dr. Jonathan Miles with us. He's an energy economist, a policy advisor, more than 15 years working in UK energy markets. Welcome.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
So let's start right at the beginning. For anyone maybe not familiar, what exactly is this Contracts for Difference scheme, in simple terms?
Right. Well, think of it like a safety net, really, for
Yeah.
renewable energy projects.
Mm.
The government guarantees a fixed price for the electricity they produce. That's the strike price. So if the actual market price drops below that, the government pays the difference.
Okay.
But if the market price goes above the strike price, then the generator pays that extra bit back.
Ah, right. So it works both ways.
Exactly. It creates stability, predictability. And that's crucial for encouraging investment in things like offshore wind, solar, tidal, these big clean tech projects.
So it's really about taking some of the risk out for the developers, making it less of a gamble.
Precisely that. Wholesale electricity prices, they can bounce around a lot. This smooths that out, makes it much more appealing to invest the huge amounts of capital these projects need. And it's actually been a key reason why the cost of renewables has come down so much over the years.
Okay, that makes sense. So now these reforms in 2025, what's actually changing? What are the key shifts?
Well, they're pretty substantial changes, actually. And they've come about because of feedback, from the industry itself. Especially offshore wind. They've made some quite specific tweaks. For example, they've created separate categories or pots for offshore wind and floating offshore wind.
Why separate them out?
Because their costs and how long they take to build are quite different. So it makes sense to treat them separately in the auctions. They've also changed how inflation is factored into that strike price. The idea is to give developers, a more realistic expectation of returns when costs are rising fast.
Which they have been.
Which they certainly have. Then there are new rules around sustainability. Supply chain plans are needed now, much stricter on environmental standards, labor standards too. And finally, something quite important. Minimum strike prices. A floor price.
To stop prices getting too low.
Exactly. To stop these sort of bidding wars where projects win contracts, but the price is so low they just aren't viable in the long run.
It sounds like quite a reaction to what's been happening. What drove this? What were the big pressures?
Yeah, it was mainly two things pushing this. First, we saw some projects, big offshore wind ones, being canceled or put on hold. That was a real red flag.
Why were they being canceled?
Rising costs, basically. Materials, steel, turbines, borrowing costs, labor. It all mounted up. And the old CfD framework just wasn't flexible enough to cope. And second, linking to that, if these big projects don't happen, it puts the UK's climate targets at risk. The 2030 targets, 2050 net zero, it's all connected.
Right, so failure wasn't really an option.
Not if we're serious about those targets, no. These reforms are really trying to get things back on track.
Let's talk about the money side then, the economics. What impact do you expect this to have on the investors, the developers?
Well, the hope and the expectation really is that this brings back confidence. Quite a bit of confidence. You had major players, people like Ørsted, SC, RWE, who'd paused projects. They were citing the economic uncertainty. So these changes, particularly around inflation and the floor prices, should make investing feel, safer, more appealing.
So maybe more bids in the next auction round, allocation round 6.
That's the aim. More projects competing, yes, and hopefully bringing some of those delayed ones back online. And another angle is the supply chain, those stricter requirements. They should encourage more activity here in the UK.
Whereabouts?
Places like Scotland, the Northeast, areas with offshore engineering history. They're really well placed to benefit from building components, servicing the turbines, all that infrastructure.
And what about us? What about consumers? What does this mean for energy bills in the long run?
The million-dollar question. Well, the theory is if you have a stable system encouraging lots of renewables, you get more clean power onto the grid. And over time, that larger supply of cheaper renewable energy should push down the overall wholesale cost of electricity.
But that takes time, presumably.
It does take time, but it's also worth remembering that CfD protection works both ways, as we said. When market prices shot up, like during the 2022 energy crisis, generators on CfDs actually paid money back.
Right, I remember that.
So that excess profit helps shield consumers a bit from those really high fossil fuel prices. It's a stabilizing effect.
You mentioned offshore and floating wind getting special attention. Why are they so important for the UK's plans?
They're absolutely fundamental. Offshore wind is, well, it's the powerhouse. We need huge amounts of it to hit that 50 gigawatt target by 2030. It's essential. And floating wind, that's the next frontier, really. It lets us build turbines in much deeper water where you can't fix them to the seabed.
Like where?
Think the Celtic Sea off the coast of Wales and southwest England or way out west of Scotland. Huge potential wind resources there. But both, especially floating wind right now, are more expensive than, say, onshore wind or solar. So they need that dedicated support, those separate pots to get them going at scale.
Okay. And you also mentioned the sustainability and jobs aspect. How do the reforms play into that? It's not just about megawatts, is it?
No, definitely not. Those new supply chain rules are key here. They basically incentivize companies to source parts and labor within the UK and to do it ethically. So you could see more turbine blades made in Hull or foundations built in Teesside, for example.
Creating local jobs.
Exactly. And also ensuring better standards, better protections for the workers involved in building and installing these projects. It's about making sure our clean energy transition is, well, actually clean in the broader sense, environmentally and socially responsible.
So it ties energy policy much more closely to industrial strategy.
Absolutely. That's a really clear trend.
Yeah.
Modern energy policy isn't just about climate targets anymore. It's about jobs, skills, regional growth, securing supply chains. They're all intertwined.
How does this revised UK approach stack up internationally? Are we still leading the way, or are others doing similar things?
That's a good question. The UK was definitely a pioneer with the CfD model. Lots of countries looked at it, but things are moving fast everywhere. You've got the US with its huge Inflation Reduction Act that's more about tax credits, a different model but massive investment. The EU is also changing its auction rules, trying to value things beyond just the lowest price.
So we need to keep adapting.
Yes. These reforms are vital to keep the UK attractive for investment, especially in offshore wind, where historically we've been a world leader. It's about staying competitive in a very active global market.
Okay, but no policy is perfect. What are the criticisms or potential weaknesses in these reforms?
Well, there are definitely concerns. Some argue it's still not enough or not fast enough given the urgency of climate change. Others worry that the new minimum prices, the floor prices, might still be set a bit too low to really rescue some of those specific offshore projects that stalled because costs rose so sharply. And there's an ongoing debate, a quite significant one, about onshore wind and solar.
Why's that?
Because they are generally cheaper and quicker to build than offshore wind, but they don't get access to the same level of CfD support under the current structure. Many argue they should, to accelerate deployment even faster.
And what about fairness across the country? Could some areas benefit much more than others?
That's a real risk, yes. Coastal areas, places in the north, Scotland, with strong links to offshore wind, they're likely to see big benefits, jobs, investment. But inland areas, maybe cities, might not see that direct impact. Unless there's also major investment in the electricity grid to connect everything up, and maybe more focus on community energy projects too.
So ensuring a just transition is still a challenge.
It absolutely is. Spreading the benefits fairly needs constant attention.
Looking further ahead then, could this CfD idea be used for more than just generating electricity?
Oh, definitely. That's where things are getting really interesting. There's a lot of talk about adapting the CfD model. Could we use it to support low-carbon hydrogen production? Or carbon capture and storage? What about long-duration energy storage, like big batteries?
So using the same basic principle, guaranteeing a price.
Essentially, yes. Guaranteeing a price for producing hydrogen, or for capturing a ton of CO2, or for providing storage capacity. The CfD framework, because it's proven to work for renewables, could become sort of the backbone for de-risking investment across a whole range of net zero technologies.
A more flexible tool then.
Exactly. Maybe even moving towards a CfD for, say, carbon savings,
Yep.
regardless of the specific technology. That could be the next big evolution. It's a fascinating area to watch.
Okay, final question. If you had to boil down the significance of these 2025 CfD reforms into just one sentence, what would it be?
One sentence. I'd say they're a vital course correction, putting realism back into ambition and making sure clean energy investment is both viable and visionary.
A vital course correction. That's a great summary. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. It's been incredibly helpful.
My pleasure entirely. Happy to discuss it.
And thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the UK's changing energy landscape. If you found this useful, please do give us a like, share the video, and subscribe to the Westferry Times YouTube channel for more conversations like this. Keep listening for smarter conversations that power the future.